Well, I'm super excited to have Dr. Peter Linneman join me on this call. For those of you who aren't familiar with Dr. Linneman, he's a principal of Linneman Associates. He's CEO of both American Land Fund and KL Realty, and he was previously a professor of real estate, finance, and public policy at Wharton. Dr. Linneman has been named one of the most powerful people in New York real estate and one of the 25 most influential people in commercial real estate. So you can see why I'm so excited to talk to him. And thanks for joining me on the call.
It's my pleasure to be here, and I'm not powerful or influential enough to get the construction in an apartment above us to stop, so we may hear a little drilling or pounding.
Well, if we're talking real estate, I guess it's authentic if we hear some real estate ambiance in the background.
Sounds good.
Let's start with probably the question you're asked more than anything, and what was your assessment of 2020?
Well, the first 2 months were fabulous, right? Until actually the first 9 weeks were really terrific in almost every way. The economy and real estate and travel and leisure and entertainment. And then unfortunately, we got to the 10th week of the year and all of it changed pretty dramatically. We went through an unprecedented situation of not just slowing down the economy, but shutting down huge swaths of the economy, with and a virus that nobody quite knew how it would play out. So you had both an economy you had no idea how it would play out and a medical situation. Plus it was in an election year with all the normal insanity of an election year, probably turbocharged on top of that, right? So other than that, it was pretty quiet. How was yours? The economy collapsed almost exactly as I thought it would in mid-March as it started. And I'll tell you an exception in a moment. And the rebound has been almost exactly as I said I thought the rebound would be in March and April for the rest of the year. And then in September, which was, I thought there'd be a huge collapse. The effective unemployment rate at its worst was probably, remember, we started 3.5% unemployment rate first week of March, and the effective, the apples to apples unemployment rate probably got as high as 25% at its worst. It is down in an apples to apples. That is, you take count of people who are on all forms of unemployment, that you take count of people who've dropped out of the labor force because there's no jobs, et cetera. The unemployment rate officially is down around 6.5%, 7%, but on an apples to apples basis, it's probably closer to 13%. But that's much improved. And very concentrated, right? There are probably, this is not literally true, but it captures it. 50% of the economy is doing just fine, just really fine. Probably 35% of the economy is doing okay, right? And 15% is struggling mightily. And that's both at an individual level and a corporate level. And you know exactly what's struggling: travel, tourism, leisure, entertainment, certain swaths of retail, et cetera. And I said in September that, okay, now the recovery is going to shift from a snapback to a butterfly. So think of a butterfly flying. They don't fly fast. They don't fly linear. They flutter around up and down. They go backwards, they stop, they go sideways. And I said, that's what the recovery will be until widespread vaccination. Why? Because the combination of what government isn't going to allow us to do, not right or wrong, isn't, it's not a judgment, and what we don't allow ourselves to do. So for example, a month ago, I could not go to the gym legally. I'm not going to the gym now because I don't want to expose myself, right? And when you start combining those two, you're going to flutter along until there's enough vaccination that says, okay, I can do whatever I want according to the government, and I can do whatever I want according to my normal life. That is probably going to not end until late this year at best. And people say, well, how do you get to late this year? This is just fast math. Fast math. Suppose they do 25 million a month vaccinations. I'm just saying, suppose. That means in 8 months, we'll have done 200 million people out of 330 million. And you start saying, okay, that says by the end of August into September, we're getting around critical mass. And if they go slower, it's later. If they go faster, it's sooner. My hunch is you need to get to probably, I'm not medically, but 250 million out of 330 to get full kind of activity. And until then, why do I want to do something, right? If I don't have to. And so there's a lot of drag. The economy, there was a couple of things that surprised me, a couple of things that didn't. The one that shocked me was single-family housing's performance. I thought single-family housing would absolutely collapse, just collapse, like no sales. I'm overstating it, but no sales. And you go, why? I said at the end of March, you need a job, you need an income, you need confidence and a down payment. And without those, you need a job to get a mortgage, right? And without those, how do you buy homes, right? How do you buy homes? And so I thought it would collapse. And it did collapse for a month and a half, 2 months. And then what happened is it bounced back. It didn't come all the way back, but it bounced back. And it didn't come back in every location. Why did it come back? Okay, you need a job. Well, as it turned out, about 80% of the people still had a job, and some of them were doing quite well. We didn't know that in March. We didn't know if we were all going to be dead in March. Second, you needed some degree of confidence. Well, those that still had jobs felt reasonably confident by June, July, they weren't going to die and that they still had a job, they had an income. And then the third thing that happened was, normally what happens in a downturn is savings crash because people draw down their savings and they're trying to get by and keep their lifestyle. Well, what happened this time was involuntary savings. What's involuntary savings? Involuntary savings was when shutdown started, your vacation you planned to Disney got canceled and you got refunded and there was nothing to spend it on. You were going to go to the Sixers. I'm a Sixers fan. Well, I got refunded. And I was going to eat out lunch 3 days a week and it went to zero. And eating home is cheaper. Oh, and just go through all that kind of stuff in an economy. And savings rate in the economy went from 7% to 33%. Unprecedented. Why does that matter to housing? You need a down payment. So if you're saving 7% of 100,000, that's 7,000 a year. 4,000 of it's in a 401k. Only 3,000 a year is available to down payment. And you got to save a lot of years. Now what happens when it's a 33% savings rate? Wow. Suddenly people in a matter of months got years worth of savings. So they weren't voluntarily not going to take a vacation. But when it didn't occur, look, honey, we've got enough money to make a down payment, low mortgage interest rates, they jumped in. So that one I completely missed with hindsight because it was totally unprecedented. So that's a quick, and we got a long way to go. We have a long way to go. People will come back to office. People will shop again. People will travel again. We can talk about why I believe that if you'd like. But in the meantime, nobody's traveling. Nobody's shopping in the tradition, not no one, but shopping in the traditional way is way down, and people aren't going to the office.
I do want to explore that a little bit further. So I'm glad you brought that up because I've found that like you, I was surprised by a lot of things. I thought we'd have a lot more calamity in the market, and a lot of areas did quite well, whereas some did worse. I thought industrial real estate outperformed the other asset classes last year, and it looks fairly favorable that it will do so again in 2021. But on your topic, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. When do you expect people to come back to the office? Does the office market run in lockstep with people coming back? Do people need to be immunized before we have that confidence again?
Yeah, I think especially the bigger the city, the more immunization has to be widespread. And that's because a lot of the workers use buses, they use mass transit, et cetera, right? So the bigger the city, and think of the suburbs, they're the easiest, small towns, the easiest, center cities of big cities the hardest in this regard because of the transmittability of this. Why will they come back to the office? There's this fantasy that they're not going to come back to the office, that the rest of eternity you and I are just going to do this. We're never going to interface personally. Okay, so think about why that's not true. First, there's a whole bunch of reasons. One, we're social animals. And this is rhetorical. I'm not going to point it to you specifically, but how many people stay late at work at night because they don't want to go home and be with their family or be alone if they don't have a family? Second, how many go to the office on Saturday and Sunday because they don't want to be alone if they live alone, or they don't want to be with their family all day? So there's a social dimension of us as a species. Second is office, what I'll call office politics. I don't mean Democrat, Republican, right? I mean, am I getting the plum assignment? Are you getting the plum assignment? Who's going to get the raise? Who's going to get to go here or there? That's hard, virtual to do. It's just hard. It can be done. Anything can be done. That's a huge part. Well, right now, no one's going to the office, so nobody's at a disadvantage in that political environment. Now imagine 75% of the people are going and you're not. Wow. You're the odd person out. And what are they saying about you? And who's getting the plum assignment? And so on and so on. That'll bring you back, even if you don't want to come back. Third is, think of the productivity, the business part of this. Right now, if I was trying to hire you, I'm at no competitive disadvantage interviewing you like this, right? I'm just like all the other people trying to hire a bright young person. Now imagine that I go to the office, you feel safe coming to the office, and we do all the normal things in your recruitment that you did you meet 6 of us, we take you to lunch, we do this, we do that. And by the way, the other 2 firms trying to recruit you do this. Who are you going to be attracted to? And if I can't win when I'm in person and the others are virtual, I shouldn't be in business. Same way with getting new business. Okay, somebody's going to be doing this and somebody else is going to be doing in person. And I know who's going to win that more often than not. So what people forget is the competitive. Right now, there's no competitive disadvantage. When some are in person and some are virtual, for 98% of it, the in-person is going to have the competitive advantage, and that's going to draw everybody back. And I can walk across the street and meet with you if it's in a big city context. So I think for all those reasons, people are going to come back and productivity will be higher. Yeah, if you have a big home and high tech and you're very disciplined and you're self-driven, this works. And by the way, a lot of us were already doing it from the road, traveling 2 days a week, 3 days a week. It's not like it's new. The real point is, how many people have a big home with high tech and no kids around and no dog barking Not everybody, certainly not even many. They need to come back to the office for productivity, but they're not going to come back until it's safe. And the odd thing is, the presence of viable vaccines actually delayed them coming back to the office. Suppose I told you there's never going to be a vaccine, ever, 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 ever. We would have to face up to how we're going to live with it. On the other hand, when you know a vaccine is there, quote, tomorrow, I'll tell you what, let's wait till tomorrow. We can tread water just a little longer. And so actually, the wonderful presence of vaccines is actually slowing the return to the office. It's slowing travel. It's in the near term. It's slowing people going shopping because I can wait. My wife and I used to eat out a lot. We aren't going out to eat, right? And you say, why not? Because I can wait another month or 2 or 3 or 5. And so it's slowing it, and then it's going to take off, right? Then it's going to really take off because you're going to have this critical mass, and we're all going to go, oh, thank God, we're safe. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, and anecdotally, I can piggyback on those comments because I have a pretty good home setup here with a lot of technology. But I said to someone the other day, if I had to extrapolate my career out for 20 years and envision it working at my house in this setup, as opposed to actually being in an office around people, I'd find that to be a very actually depressing thought. So I can't wait to get back to the office and go back to restaurants again like it was before.
The only people who like the idea, really like it, nobody likes the commute part, but the only people who really like the idea are academics and quote, writers who mostly by personality are loners. So they always, I always, I was an academic forever, and it's the only place where you go and all the doors are closed. Where do you go where all the doors are closed? And that's because most of them are introverts. Most of them are doing very focused stuff. They don't want to interact by and large, except in controlled moments. So I think your sociological point is just dead on. And by the way, we've seen in China and these other places, people have come back to the office. And when the risk is low. And I don't know why we would be any different. Will there be a little more flexibility? Okay, fine. There's a little more flexibility. But I still need an office space for them. Mm-hmm. In the same, I needed office space for somebody who was traveling a lot. And the small workspace, the 90, 100 foot per worker stuff, that's dead. That's gone. So right now, you don't have to refit it because nobody's in the office, right? But now let's say we get everybody back to the office. We're too jammed in. And I'm going to have all these offices that were fit out with cool butcher blocks, sitting shoulder to shoulder, hot seat, et cetera. They're going to have to move to traditional-ish cubicles, walls, rooms, et cetera. Because the fear of future pandemics is going to say, I'm not going to be caught short again, right? I'm just not going to be caught short again. So actually, the space per worker will eventually increase, and that'll bolster demand. But that's a couple of years down the line, I think.
And I think that is important because there's always going to be offsetting effects. You can't just necessarily make a prediction in a vacuum and say the pandemic has affected demand and we're going to see duress on the office market. There's those offsetting factors like you're mentioning about the open concept office potentially going to more of that traditional office and demand offsets it. So I agree. Yeah. I think that there's all these additional factors that take into account.
I have to tell you one story. Sometimes truth is stranger than fiction. So I was explaining what I just said in a session about 3 months ago. And the next speaker, Zoom, starts out by saying, I think Peter is exactly wrong. And with that, it goes wrong. And he freezes. And I kind of said, I think I win. This is wonderful, but it's hardly perfect, right?
That's a checkmate right there.
Yeah. Well, not to dwell on it, but you hear there's construction noise here. If we were face to face and there was construction noise, what would we do? We'd go to a nearby cafe. We'd do this, we'd do that, we'd do that. Can't quite do that in this context.
Yeah, great point. So I'd like to switch gears a bit and talk policy and some of the plans that policymakers are implementing, which will have a pretty big impact on commercial real estate. In a recent video, you said that the aggressive monetary expansion over the last year
Right.
will likely lead to asset value
Right.
inflation as opposed to consumer inflation. So I'd love to
Right.
get your thoughts on that, and specifically how you think that impacts the different asset classes and cap rates in general.
Terrific. So let me go back to the last part of your question first, which is the research I've done starting about 7 years ago, and including a piece I did with Matt Lariva of SCP, I don't know, 6 months ago, which took a much more sophisticated statistical approach. Says, look, the main determinant of cap rates, it's not the growth in the GDP, it's not unemployment, it's not this, it's not interest rates, short term or long term, it's the flow of funds. It's how much money is chasing. And you go intuitively, that kind of makes sense. And it statistically kind of makes sense. So we found that. So now bear that in mind as I now talk. The cap rates appear to be primarily driven by how much money is chasing. Okay, now let's go to the first part of your question. In the 1970s and times prior to that, we had a very fragmented banking system in the US, very fragmented, and elsewhere in the world. And when the Fed put a lot of money in the system, the banks were set up to put it out to people to buy Wonder Bread and Cheerios. Okay. And not surprisingly, if the banks were set up to give a whole lot of money that came into the system to people who buy bread and Cheerios in the 70s, you got a lot of consumer price inflation. Okay. Now let's go to 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. A lot of money was put in the system by the Fed, but it was put into a very different banking system. It was put into basically 10 banks. And those banks, just, JP Morgan, B of A, Citi, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, they're not set up to give money to people to buy Cheerios. They're set up to give money to people to buy the company that makes Cheerios. They're set up to give money to the company that makes Wonder Bread and other assets. Now, can they make consumer loans? Yes, but it's not the easiest thing for those companies because they want to put out big amount of money, right? So what happened in that banking system when you saw the Fed put a lot of money into the system in 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, QE1, QE2, QE3? And what you saw is eventually that money came out over the subsequent years. It did not chase Wonder Bread. It chased gold. It chased apartments. It chased the stocks. It chased bonds. It chased silver. And were there assets that did not go up in price? Yeah, there were a few, but that's true of the consumer inflation era, right? The consumer inflation, there were always some that went down. When you set up the banking system to put money out into assets, asset inflation occurred, not consumer inflation. Okay. So what we had over the decade 9 to 19 was asset price inflation, which we would say was cap rate compression in our world, or yield compression and the multiple expansion. And that's because we put unprecedented money in. We did not get consumer price, we got asset. Okay, now let's go to this scenario. We just put huge amounts of money, again, in the financial system. We again gave it to 10 banks. Those 10 banks are first and foremost set up ultimately to chase assets with it. And yes, they will get some consumer loans, which will chase goods and services. Therefore, as I sit here, I see a replay of 2009 to 2019 over the next decade. And I can't tell you exactly how it unfolds. Because it's when it comes out is the question. And it didn't come out for a couple of years last time, won't come out for a couple of years this time. But when it does, my belief is it'll chase assets again. And that's because that's what those banks are set up to do. And therefore you'll get more money, back to where we started, more money chasing a fixed or relatively fixed stock of assets, which will bid up prices, bid down cap rates, as it were. That's what I foresee. And people say, well, we've never seen them that low. We've never seen this much money in the system. So the reason we've never seen anything like this is we never saw this much money in the system. Never. We never saw this much money come into the system before. And we never saw it come in where the objective was chase assets much more than chase goods and services. So could there be some consumer price inflation? Yeah. But I think it's more asset price. And there's this, if you really look up in your textbook, what is inflation? It's the on average movement of prices in the economy. It doesn't say consumer prices. It's the on average movement of prices. So in the 1970s, we had high movement of consumer prices, little movement in asset prices. And what we had 2009 to 19 was little movement in consumer prices, but high movement in asset prices. And I think that's kind of what you'll get again. And you're of kind of the right age to maybe remember Beavis and Butthead, these kind of slacker dude, 15, 16-year-olds. And I say, imagine the Fed, instead of giving the money to the 10 banks, had given $4 trillion through Beavis and Butthead. Do you think the price of assets would go up a lot? No. Do you think the price of Wonder Bread would go up a lot? No. What would go up in price a lot is what Beavis and Butthead buy.
AC/DC records.
Skateboards, AC/DC t-shirts, pot, whatever it would be, right? So when you think about it that way, the money's going to go to who they gave it to kind of do something with. And the interesting thing about giving it to asset users is I'm an asset user. I buy your asset, but you're also an asset user, and you put it mostly back to work buying assets. Yes, you might have bought a little bit more Wonder Bread, right? But mostly what you did with it was you sold one asset and bought another. So you had it kind of churning in the system that way.
So I guess the other side of the coin, if we do see that asset value appreciation, and that does have a corresponding downward pressure on cap rates, the opposite of that would be interest rates potentially going up at some point in the future here, and possibly lowering that spread between, call it the 10-year treasury and cap rates.
I think they'll go up a bit. This is different than what I think they should do, but what I think that they will do is, at least for the next several years, keep both the long and the short end of the financing curve as low as possible. Why? We've floated a lot of debt, and they want to keep the debt service as low as possible, both for private borrowers, but even more importantly for government borrowers. And that's not just here, that's around the world. Mm-hmm. And so central banks, in an odd way, have reverted back to what they did prior to the 1970s, which was facilitate government spending. They're doing it with independence. They didn't used to have independence. They were told to do it. Now what's happened is a little different. They have full independence, but they're kind of saying, my job is inflation and to support the economy. And if I let interest rates go, there's going to be a lot of stress, so I'm not going to let them go there. And there are going to be a lot of tax increases, so I'm not going to let them go there. So think about it. You can borrow $1 trillion. Just think about it. At a 0.5% interest rate, you got to be kidding me. So when people say, can we afford this spending? We've so far committed $3 trillion for CARES. And you go, $3 trillion at 0.5% a year interest is rounding error. It's nothing. It's literally nothing. On a the U.S. government had a $4.3 trillion budget in 2019. If you add that extra interest cost, it's still 4.3 trillion is my point, right? It's rounding here. And So we can afford it in a cash flow sense. Another way also to remember, of course, people ask this question, can we afford this 3 trillion? And by the way, suppose it's another 2 trillion, beyond the 3 trillion already approved to do this. So let's say it's 5 trillion. It's still nothing in terms of interest at a 0.5% interest. And the 0.5% is blending the real short-term rate with the long-term rate, right? You're kind of saying they're financing it in the middle. And you go, by the way, I think off the top of my head, the Federal Reserve says household net wealth is $125 trillion in the United States. And outstanding federal debt, if we put a couple trillion more on it, would be about 25 trillion. So the households could pay off the entire outstanding federal debt. And remember, they'd receive about half of the payments and foreigners would receive the other half. And still have $100 trillion left, right? Which is higher than we've ever had, except a couple of points in history. So, of course, we can afford it in that sense. And then if you think about it in terms of wealth, do the present value of the U.S. economy. People don't think that way, but don't think of GDP, think of the present value of GDP, the ability to pay for it. And you might come up with a number like $600 to $800 trillion, and we're going to borrow 5 trillion from ourselves out of the future to help people who were going to otherwise suffer unemployed. They were not going to get the vaccine developed as quickly, the business support, all that. And you go, this is not stimulus spending. This is not about stimulus spending. This is about helping innocent victims of a medical and economic catastrophe, right? This is no different than after Katrina or some natural disaster, to help them out, right? To tide them over. And you say, well, why don't those people go borrow from their own future? Because they don't have a job and they're not credit worthy at that moment, so they can't borrow. So what can happen is the US government borrows for them, tides them over, right, to get to the other side. And then the thing is, all of us pay it back. And all of us, in some sense, should pay it back because they're innocent victims of this. I'm not saying 100% of them are innocent, but most are innocent. Those hotel workers were innocent victims. The retail workers, innocent victims. The people who took tickets at the basketball game, they're innocent victims. And so society really should, I think, help them out, at least for a while. So we can, of course, afford it. The difficult problem is, go back to that interest payment I was talking about, and someday in the future, I want you to pay for it. And you want me to pay for it. So that's very different than can we afford it? It's who gets stuck with the bill. And that is a very challenging political question. We have no problem paying the bill. It's just that everybody, literally everybody in society wants somebody else to pay for it. That's an old and noble tradition. And that argument will go on for a while.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that sentiment. I just read the other day that Denmark announced a 0% 20-year fixed mortgage, which is crazy. I mean, you talk about kicking the can down the road. That's 20 years of 0%. Do you see anything like that happening in North America? And the piggyback on that question is, how long can we have these low interest rates for?
Longer than I live, let's put it that way, which is all I care about. Now you're going to live longer, right? Look, remember, any asset value is artificial. Every asset value is artificial. You say, I need a 6% return. Where did you get that number? Where'd you get the number you want a 6% return? If I change the world around you, you may need a 9% return or a 2% return. And all we're doing is just changing the amount of money in the system. That's all we're doing in that regard. And not surprising, if you put a lot more money in, the asset values go up. the income hasn't changed so much, and the quote required yield goes down because what's the alternative? So think of Monopoly. You know, the kids' game you play. Imagine 3 times as much money was given to everybody to start with and every time in between. What you'd see is the rent relative to would go down, right? If you could bid, you know, so to speak, to buy. If they didn't have fixed prices. If instead of fixed prices, they were bid prices, the prices would go up for those slots. And that's kind of what we're having. So it could go on a long time. It does have distortions. It does have a cost. What's the cost? The cost is you're giving money to borrowers and taking money from savers. Okay? And you're doing more of that now than you were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. If you're a borrower, you're going, that's great. And if you're a saver, you're going, excuse me, right? Think of your, great-grandmother, your grandmother, who saved all her life, and she has her money in 6 months CDs. She lost, right? She lost because CDs did not inflate in value. She didn't pick an asset that inflated in value, and the interest rate is zero. So we took from her, and anything she purchased got hurt. On the other hand, you're a borrower and you got benefited. Now, if you think about it, real estate's a big borrower. So real estate is somewhat favored by this. And they're also favored by the asset price chasing, right? The other what's the largest borrower in the world? Our government, right? And other sovereign governments. So what we've done is effectively with low interest rates, subsidize big borrowers, which basically you were talking about, look, in Denmark, you're making mortgage money available at zero. And doesn't that distort, right? What do you think it does if you give to Congress money at zero, right? It's going to make them spend more money than they otherwise would have because the political kickback against it, the backlash against it is way down, right? So the cost of all this is this distortion between savers and non-savers. And the other thing is it creates this challenge of I want you to pay and you want me to pay for it to the extent we kick it down the road. And that has a lot of political ramifications.
Yeah, I said this to someone the other day. Imagine if Visa gave you a credit card and it was at 0% interest and it was unlimited and you never had to pay it back. How much would you spend? And I think the answer is you'd buy everything you could.
You'd certainly buy more, right? You'd certainly buy more. And that's what we've done in particular to governments. I don't mean this moment in time. I even mean over this longer period of low interest rates around the world. And you see it in Japan, right? Japan has spent. And since the interest cost is so low, they don't have to tax into oblivion to support it. But savers get robbed to support whatever the government was spending on.
Great point. I want to go back to one of the things you said about just taking the present value of GDP, because I think that segues into the next topic, and that's the book that's behind you, and I've got a copy here.
Here, yeah,
up there. So it's the real estate financial modeling. It's a course that you've written the textbook for. It's on its 5th edition now, and you've also been involved in some of the instruction videos. So just want to get your thoughts on this, because I think this really fills a void of lacking commercial real estate education. So I just want to get your thoughts on how it got.
Yeah. So you're very kind to bring that up. So we have 3 products. One, Linneman letter, which is here, is really high level. What do you think? What's the big kind of questions we're talking about, though we drill down? It's thick, right? It's a long letter. Second, the book was my course, and then we keep updating it. And Bruce Kirsch joined me, and we technoed it a bit as well. Bruce is a former student, good friend, and we technoed it because Bruce is more techno than am I. And we kind of turbocharged it. And then Bruce had the idea of increasingly universities are not rigorous. And I'm not just true. And so as an employer, if an employer was looking at one of my students back in the day, they knew what they went through. And if they had a certain grade, they knew what it meant. Now, not every employer knew that, but at least some did. And Bruce had the idea, what if we do a real rigorous program and we do online and we use the book and we supplement it with videos and we do and we do and we do. And we have difficult tests that you actually have to pass. And if you pass them, we'll certify you pass them. And if you pass it with high honors, we'll certify that. And what's the point? The point is so that if an employer sees that you're certified, they at least know that you did really well in my class, so to speak. And yes, it's a virtual class rather than an in-person, but we also do a lot of financial modeling in it, exercises, you have to master them. And so it's been quite well received by the market. You can get information on it, you can get information on the book, you can get information on the Linneman letter at linnemansssociates.com or to my brother, D. Linneman at Linneman Associates. But what we were trying to fill was rigor, not just on this topic. Because if you just want to buy my book, there's nothing wrong with that. But I can't guarantee you got rigor, right? This is only do this program if you want the rigor. So it's interesting. We've had people who did not have real estate backgrounds that have taken it to turbocharge themselves. We had people who came out of Berkeley and Wisconsin and Wharton and majored in real estate and have taken this and said, this was much more rigorous and I learned much more than I did in my courses. And I think it's because the combination of financial modeling in detail, the rigor, the exams, and there's no curve here. There's no curve. This is old school. You either do it or you don't. And if you look at it, we tell people how many hours we think you need to do this. Our daughter effectively is a senior at Temple University. She just finished it. She's already taken a whole bunch of real estate courses at Temple. And she said, I learned so much more from this, which is not an admonition of those courses. I think as much as it is a comment on the rigor demanded and the breadth exposed to in this. But it is not for somebody who just wants casual. If you just want casual, buy the book, leaf through it, you'll learn just like any other book. But so it's filling that niche. And I think it's doing it pretty well in the word of mouth. I mean, we have people like Blackstone required of a whole bunch of their people, which, as they get hired, and I think others are on that, doing that, and more will be on that track. I'm not trying to say it's perfect, but it is. We're very proud of it. It's been quite successful, and we keep tweaking it.
Well, I've been in the business for 15 years. I've got an MBA, I've got CCIM and SIOR designations, and I'm going through this program right now. That's why I reached out to you to have this interview. And I would echo your comments from a student's perspective. It's a fantastic course, great information. It's very robust, great instruction. Technology is great. I'm a huge proponent of it. So I think you guys are.
Well, thank you very kindly. And we feel good, obviously, about it commercially, but actually the educator in me, I feel good about it because I'm really dedicated all my life to education. And there's very few people who, rigor is important. Let's just put it that way. Mm-hmm. And answerability. And I think you'd say that there's rigor and answerability in the program if you want to complete it. Now, if you don't want to complete it, there's not rigor or answerability. But then we won't certify you. So that's what we're really trying to do. And it's wonderful to hear you and a lot of others. We've gotten to a person, we've had nothing but wonderful reviews from every student who's taken it.
I'll put a link in the description of this video to that program as well. And yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you for creating it. I think it definitely fills a void. And last thing I just wanted to touch on, shifting gears outside the business perspective, you're actively involved in a charity called Save a Mind, Give a Choice.
Yeah.
So I know that the mission of the program is to provide quality education for underprovided students in Kenya, but just wanted to get more from you on that program. What got you into it, and what you're...
So I went on holiday in 1990, no, in 2002. And to make a long story short, we said that we would support 4 12-year-olds as long as they went to school. And these were children from the most abysmal economic circumstances you could imagine. And in some cases, family circumstances. And all 4 of them graduated through university. And we provided whatever they needed. We put them in private schools over there, etc. I referred to my daughter from Temple. She was orphaned, I think, at age 7. She's been under our support over all those years. She's at Temple University here. And an amazing young woman that otherwise, what happens to a 7-year-old orphan girl that no one cares about in the world? And this young woman's got a great job lined up when she graduates and so forth. And I can give you other stories. We went from 4, we've graduated about 90 from either high school or university. We have one getting a PhD at the University of Georgia down in what is it, Athens, I think it's at. We have 140 children in the pipeline. The charity is called SAM, Save a Mind, capital S, capital A, capital M. Elimu, E-L-I-M-U, which means education in Kenyan. And what we have are about a third of the children are orphans, about a third of the children are effectively orphaned, and a third of the children are in good families but destitute situations. And the notion was, if we could touch 100 children, one of them's got to be 1 in 100. Right? Just one of them's got to be 1 in 100. And think of the good that 1 in 100 person does. And 5 of them have to be 5 in 100. And, and so that's what we do. And any of you interested, please feel free. You can find information again at Linneman Associates. Again, through my brother at D. Linneman at linnemanassociates.com. We go over every year. We couldn't go this last year, obviously. We spend time, about 10 days with the children, and we do what we can. We provide their clothing, their this, their that, the other, whatever they need, we essentially provide. And I say to people, if you think you have trouble with your 3 kids, imagine us with our 140. On the other hand, if you think you have joy and satisfaction from the success of your 3 kids, imagine the joy and success out of 140. And some of these kids would be dead. I mean, I'm not trying to claim credit. That's not. But some of these kids, I mean, what happens to an orphan at the age of 8 is physical abuse, sexual abuse, et cetera, and a lot of them don't survive. And it's so small, but it's very rewarding. Amazing kids, amazing people, and we'd welcome your involvement and support.
Well, I think that speaks to you as a passionate educator, but also just as a humanitarian. I think that's awesome.
It's, like a lot of things, you start thinking you're doing it to help them, and you end up realizing that they've helped you at least as much grow as a person and improve and so forth. It's been very rewarding for us.
Well, yeah, thanks for sharing that. I'll put some more information on that as well, and encourage you to check it out. Well, thank you very much. I know you've got a meeting coming up, so I'll end it there. But I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. I've learned a lot, and I hope other people have too.
It's my pleasure, and thank you very much.
Okay, well, have a great day.